looking at the upper portion of the chest here. So from basically your heart upwards, you are looking at the major veins. So last week we talked about the different kinds of blood vessels. This week we're going to focus more so on, not blood vessels, blood, leukocyte last week. This week we're going to focus on your blood vessels, okay? So you're going to notice that everything's labeled on this slide for you. But on the following slide, it's not, like I said, very, very poor quality here. So that's why I want you to take clear pictures and make sure that you can see the numbers clearly, okay? All right, so you have your common carotid artery on the right side. You have your right internal jugular vein. So again, you're looking at your model face on, okay? I want you to notice how here, okay, when it comes to these large veins, you actually have a bifurcation off of the superior vena cava, okay, which is down here, okay? And I need you guys to look at how that bifurcation occurs between the right and the left side. Don't have a meter stick, but that's okay. I guess I will stand behind the podium today.
No meter stick.
I know, there's no meter stick in here. Oh, yeah,
What?
yes, there is. You're recording that, aren't you? All right, so I want you guys to notice here's that superior vena cava, it's coming off, right? When you bifurcate, the left side just automatically becomes the left brachiocephalic vein. Everybody clear on that? The left brachiocephalic vein. And then that's gonna lead into the left subclavian vein. The right side is a little bit weird because I want you to notice how you have the right brachiocephalic vein, but from the right brachiocephalic vein, okay, it's gonna diverge into the right subclavian and that right internal jugular. Okay, so there are two things coming off of this brachiocephalic vein right here. Everybody here clear? Okay, so I want you guys to notice here's that right brachiocephalic vein, 240. Everybody here following me there? Okay, notice how two things are coming off of it. You have the right subclavian and then you have that right internal jugular that's going upwards. Everybody seeing it? Okay. On the left side, the only thing that you have, okay, is that subclavian vein. You don't have anything going up there. Everybody clear? That's a pretty important distinguishing feature for your veins up here by your throat area. Everybody good?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, talking about arteries here, generally speaking, at least for the upper portion, if you're calling something a subclavian vein, there's also going to be an artery that's running parallel to it that's going to tend to have the same name. Okay, so here you have the left subclavian artery. You don't really see the right one on that side, okay? But there's a portion here called the brachiocephalic trunk, okay? And then notice how here you have the right common carotid artery, okay? So the next slide is blank. It's the same exact picture. I essentially just want you to look at it and try to test yourselves without the labels, okay? Not that it helps very much because, like I said, potato quality right now. Okay, everyone good? Yes? Yes. Okay, so slide 4, here's your reference. So now we're looking at the abdominal area here. So if you have guts on there, take them out. Okay. Yeah, they're pretty awful, but that's why I wanted you guys to be here and to look at them. By the way, feel free to post these up on your discussion board if you want, because I want you guys to really learn from one another. Like, you can't even really tell them apart, but at least the numbers are here for you, okay? All right, so this is mostly arteries that we're gonna be looking at. So you have the inferior phrenic artery. I'm gonna point out this word phrenic right here. So this phrenic artery, okay, the word phrenic, pretty important because there is a nerve that runs alongside it called the phrenic nerve. You guys heard of that one?
Yeah.
The phrenic nerve. Do you guys know what it innervates?
Your diaphragm.
The diaphragm. So this phrenic nerve is actually pretty dang important because it's gonna tend to run fairly close to this phrenic artery, and it's gonna innervate your diaphragm. And if you have misfiring, dysfunction in that phrenic nerve, that's how you get hiccups. Okay? But there's also another nerve that we're going to talk about next week called the vagus nerve that also innervates that. Okay? So here's the right phrenic artery, here's the left inferior phrenic artery. Okay? When you look down at the bottom, there's going to be a pretty large vessel. I know you really can't see it here, but it's going to be called the abdominal aorta. Okay? The majority of your major arteries in the lower portion is going to diverge off of that abdominal aorta. Okay? So you guys know the aorta, right? It's the largest artery that you have in the body. Okay? So things are going to diverge off of that. There's going to be the lower portion called the abdominal aorta. If you damage that, okay, if you damage that abdominal aorta, that's not good, okay? If you have any sort of what you would call an aortic dissection, have you guys heard of that term before? What does it mean to dissect something?
To slice up or
To slice up, okay? If you have something called an aortic dissection, essentially your aorta is being shredded to pieces. You're gonna bleed out really, really fast. Chances are though, if you have something called an aortic dissection, by the time they catch it, it's too late because they're really difficult to repair. If this abdominal aorta shreds up, that means that your abdominal cavity is gonna pool with blood, and then the rest of your abdominal organs and your lower extremities are not gonna get the blood supply that they need. Not a good thing. Yeah.
how, I mean, based on how I see it, outside of a major car accident or fall, how do you injure it?
So you don't necessarily injure it, but there are some things like if you have weakening of the abdominal wall, the aortic wall, that could cause it to shred.
Okay.
So like I said, a lot of the times aortic dissections tend to go undetected until it's too late and they can't do anything. Because this aortic dissections will always, always, always require surgical repair. Okay? And if they do, and this, okay, have you guys heard of something called the widowmaker?
Yes.
Okay, so that has something to do with myocardial infarctions, heart attacks, blockages in your coronary arteries. This is another widowmaker right here, aortic dissections. Just because you tend to find it, like I said, really late, okay? All right, what does renal mean? Renal, what does renal have anything to do with? Your kidneys. What does supra mean? Above, okay? Hey, can I tell you guys something? Superior suprarenal artery. You have two of them. You have a left one and then you have a right one here. There's the left one, okay? This is kind of redundant, isn't it? Because you have two words that literally mean superior or above of. So these go above your kidneys, okay? You have the splenic vein and the splenic artery. What organ do these two structures innervate? Go to. The spleen, right? The spleen, pretty important. Notice how these two are also pretty large veins because what happens in your spleen, based on your lymphatic system chapter? You guys watch those videos, right?
Oh, your red blood cells are recycled.
Bingo. Okay, so the splenic vein and the splenic artery, they're pretty significant structures because your erythrocytes actually go to your spleen for recycling. Old red blood cells go over there, okay, they get broken down, and then the resources are basically shunted back into your bloodstream so that you can use them for erythropoiesis in the bone marrow. Everybody good there? Yes? Then you have the celiac trunk, you have the hepatic artery here. What does the hepatic artery innervate, everybody? Hepato anything has something to do with what organ?
The liver.
The liver, good. Do you guys remember talking about the hepatic portal vein before? Okay, So remember, between the hepatic artery and the hepatic portal vein, 75 to 80% of the liver's blood supply is going to come from that hepatic portal vein, which is directly connected to other abdominal organs, mainly the small intestine. However, you still need to get 20 to 25% of your blood supply from the systemic circuit, so that's why you have to have that hepatic artery, so that your liver can achieve something called hepatic clearance, which is the minimum amount of systemic blood that the liver needs so that it can do its job of clearing toxins out from the rest of your body. Okay? But again, I brought this up for you guys before. The majority of the toxins that you are gonna have, that you're gonna encounter, is gonna come from where?
Your food.
Your food, your diet. So it makes sense that majority of the blood that goes to the liver is gonna come through the hepatic portal vein, which is attached to your digestive organs, specifically your small intestine, which is where the majority of digestion and absorption is going to occur. Does that make sense to everybody? Oh God, this thing's just in the way. Well, here's another reference slide for you. Lots of reference slides for this one. Okay, so for this part, we are now going to be looking at the lower portion. Okay, the lower portion, the lower abdomen here, closer to the pelvic cavity. Okay. All right. So I want you guys to look at the tops here. Notice how you have a superior mesenteric artery and a superior mesenteric vein. What are your mesenteries? You guys were studying, right? Mesenteries come from chapter 25, digestive system. So what are your mesenteries?
They're in the peritoneal cavity.
Huh?
They're in the peritoneal cavity.
Yeah,
And
so what do they do?
Stabilize organs and like, I don't know how to say it. I
So
know.
your mesenteries, you guys, are extensions of your peritoneum, and they help suspend your abdominal organs in the abdominal cavity. Okay. The mesentery specifically refers to the organ. We're not going to call it connective tissue at this point because they have been upgraded to organ status. Okay. The mesenteries are the organs that will specifically hold your small intestines in place, which if you think about it, the small intestines are actually your largest, well, it's not your largest abdominal organ, but it's the longest portion of your alimentary canal, correct? It's about 24 feet long, okay? So it's there, and because the other supportive structures, so things like the falciform ligament, the mesocolons, etc. Okay, all of those are also going to be derived from the mesenteries. So it makes sense why the mesenteries themselves and their supportive structures are going to have their own blood supply. And this is actually one of the main reasons why, okay, the mesentery was upgraded to organ status. If you think about the definition of an organ, it's a collection of different tissues that work together. Before, people just thought that the mesenteries was just a bunch of connective tissue, and as it turns out, it's not. It's actually performing all of these different functions. They have this really rich blood supply. So like I said, that's why it's been upgraded to an organ, okay? Then you have the inferior pancreaticoduodenal artery, okay? Which two structures do you think that's gonna innervate? So pancreas is one. What's the other one? The duodenum of what organ? The small intestine. Hey, right quick here, everybody. What are the three parts of the small intestine in order? Duodenum, jejunum, ileum. Which part connects to the stomach? Which part connects to the large intestine? Which part is responsible for the majority of absorption and digestion? Jejunum. Okay. All right. So down here, I want you to notice, remember we were talking about that large abdominal aorta? By the time you get to the lower portion, to the pelvic cavity, it's gonna have to bifurcate. Why? What?
Left and right, or left and right? Just,
Think larger structures, much larger than the ovary. What am I standing on?
oh, your legs.
My legs, right? So it's gonna have to diverge, okay, into the common iliac arteries. So you have a right one and a left one there. Those iliac arteries will go down. Why do you think it's called iliac artery? The what?
You're right.
The what? Okay, do you guys know there's something called the iliac crest on your coxal bones? And then remember your coxal bones, they have a part on there called the ilium. You guys remember that? Yeah? Okay. That's why. That's why it's called the iliac artery, because it's gonna go through, okay, and down into your lower ones. Now I want you guys to notice here too. Notice how that common iliac artery is really, really large. Yes? I want you to notice that on both sides you have two smaller arteries diverging off of them. They're going to come off of them. These are now called your internal iliac arteries here, okay? So they're basically going to the inner portion of your legs. Any questions on that? All good? Yes? No? Maybe.
Information.
I know.
So the one stop.
Study it after the exam, okay? All right, here you have your common iliac vein. You do have a left and a right one also, okay? When it comes to the heart, okay, when it comes to the heart, I essentially want you guys to know for the outside, the coronary arteries and the coronary veins. What does it mean when we classify veins and arteries as coronary?
For the artery.
It's for the heart, okay? Remember, your heart is also a muscle. So that means that the heart itself is gonna have really high aerobic requirements. Okay, it's still a muscle, so it's gonna need a lot of ATP to be constantly pumping. And think about this, your heart is basically working up until the day that you die. Okay, it does not stop. If it stops, what happens? You're dead, right? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Okay, it's a really bad thing, right? So you need to make sure that not only does the heart have to pump blood and give oxygen to the rest of your body, but it also needs to supply itself. Now, when we talk about things like heart attacks, right? It means that you have some sort of blockage in any one of these structures, specifically your coronary arteries, okay? Because if you have blockages in your coronary arteries, then that means that the heart itself cannot get the blood and oxygen that it needs. And when that happens, the heart can't do its job, and the rest of your body's basically in trouble, right? Okay, so you have your superior vena cava here. How many vena cavas do you have? You have two. You have a superior one and an inferior one. So the superior one drains all of the structures above the heart. The inferior drains all of the structures below the heart, okay? You only have one aortic arch here. We're going to call it the aortic arch because even though in a lot of textbooks they just call it the aorta, the proper term for it is aortic arch because it goes up and then it loops over like a rainbow. That's why it's called the aortic arch here, okay? All right, you have your pulmonary artery right here. You have the right coronary artery, okay? What? All right, here's the right atrium. And the issue that I have with models, okay, and you've heard me talk about this before, is that things aren't necessarily to scale. Do you guys remember me kind of complaining about these muscles right here? Okay, well, it's kind of the same issue with the heart. The reason why I'm telling you this is because in your models, those atria look really big. They are not, they're actually pretty tiny, okay? When they're inflated, they're essentially called atria. When they're deflated and they're not full of blood, they're just kind of like these sad little flaps called auricles. Okay, so this one's very full right now, okay, but that's your right atrium and your left atrium, right there. Everybody here clear? Yes? Okay, great. Okay, so when we're talking about that coronary artery, so here's the right one, okay, the left one's back here, okay. In your lecture notes, it talks about how the right and left coronary arteries are going to branch out. You definitely need to know those, okay? Here you have the greater cardiac vein, and then you have the anterior cardiac veins that will bring the blood supply of the heart back into the systemic circuit. Okay? If you flip your heart over to the back, okay, want you to notice now that you can see a better view of your pulmonary artery. You can actually see your pulmonary veins right here, the left ones. You can see the superior vena cava. Here's the aortic arch, okay? I don't know what that says, atrium. That's supposed to be atrium. Here's the left atrium. And then you remember me talking about that greater cardiac vein? That greater cardiac vein actually runs all the way across. It runs all the way across, okay? There's also a portion that diverges off of it called the posterior vein, and then here is your left ventricle. All good? All right. If you look at it from the very back side, not the left side, so the previous slide was a left lateral view. So now if you look at it from the very back, notice how you can now definitely see that inferior vena cava, okay? Notice how your vena cava are actually really, really large. There is a reason for this. When you have watched your blood vessel videos, okay, and at this point, you guys, we are behind in class, so I am putting a lot of trust in you that you're watching those videos and paying super duper close attention to them, because some of them I may not get to, but you're still going to be responsible for that information, okay? If you have questions, ask me. Your vena cava, your superior and your inferior ones are your largest blood vessels. This is incredibly important, and their shape is highly variable. They are very, very stretchy. They're highly elastic, because the pressure in your vena cava, do you guys know what it is? What's the average pressure in your vena cava? Give me a number, any number.
88.
Huh?
88.
Lower.
40.
Lower. Huh? Lower. What? It's not 0 point something, it's 0. It's 0. The pressure literally in your vena cava, the superior and the inferior one, has to be at 0. You want no impedance, meaning you don't want any sort of resistance to the blood coming back to the heart. So it has to be 0, and that's why they also tend to be very highly elastic and stretchy, because they're not going to resist any kind of flow. Does that make sense to everybody here? You really want to make sure that any blood that's coming from the rest of your body, because remember, the vena cava is going to be essentially the last point where the blood from the rest of your body is going to be at before it comes to the heart. So you don't want any sort of impedance to that blood flow into the heart, because otherwise it's going to be problematic, and then you're going to end up having a bunch of pooling somewhere. You don't want that. So like I said, what's the blood pressure in your vena cava?
0.
It's 0, okay, 0. They have very, very little amounts of smooth muscle in that tunica media that they've got, okay? All right, here's this large vein right here. This is called the coronary sinus. Do you guys remember in the previous slide, you have the greater cardiac vein and the posterior vein? Do you guys remember that? Okay. Both of these structures are going to come from that coronary sinus. Okay. So notice how the coronary sinus is a large vein that runs across the back of your heart. Any questions on this one, everybody? Any questions? Good. Alright, if you're looking at the right side of the heart, you have your superior vena cava, which you're seeing there. Here's that pulmonary artery. Why is the pulmonary artery blue? It's not a vein, it's an artery. Because it's bringing blood away from the heart. But why is it blue?
Deoxygenated.
What?
Deoxygenated.
It's carrying deoxygenated blood. Because remember, everybody, the pulmonary artery takes the deoxygenated blood that you receive from the systemic circuit and it brings it to the lungs for oxygenation. So when we now look at the pulmonary veins, which are these guys right here, why are they red? Because now the blood is oxygenated, because where did the blood come back from? The what?
Lung.
The lungs. It came back from the lungs, okay? So like I said, it's a really common misconception that a lot of people have, that all arteries carry oxygenated blood, all veins carry deoxygenated blood. That is not true. These two are your big exceptions to that so-called rule. It's not really a rule, right? But what is a rule that we know of regarding veins and arteries? Veins carry blood towards the heart. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. Does that make sense to everybody here?
And then can you remind me which one has a thicker muscle layer?
We'll look at it in a little bit. Okay, so I think you're asking me about the ventricles. We'll look at it in a little bit. Okay, all right, here's the right atrium, here's that inferior vena cava, and then here's that anterior cardiac. Take a breath, this one's got a lot. But I want you to notice that a lot of these are repeats. You guys notice that? You're just looking at it from a different view, okay? The top portion, this is called the aortic arch, but when it's coming directly off of the heart, right, when it's coming directly off of your left ventricle, it's called the aorta, right here. This is the aorta. The very bottom, they just call it the aortic valve. In your notes, I want you to write down aortic SL valve, or semilunar valve, okay, aortic semilunar valve, right here. Everybody good?
Lunars?
Semi-lunar, like half moon. Everyone good? All right. Here's the valve for the inferior vena cava right there, okay? All right, I want you guys to look here. These two white structures, so 293 and 296, okay, this is your bicuspid or your mitral valve. This is an AV valve, atrioventricular valve, because it's going to be in between the atrium and the ventricles. So for this one, put down bicuspid or mitral valve. This one is your tricuspid valve. Tricuspid. This is going to be on the right side of the heart, in between the right atrium and the right ventricle. Everybody good?
What was 293 again?
Huh?
Which
This
was
one?
the tricuspid?
This is the tricuspid.
Okay.
Bicuspid, tricuspid.
Wait, so the semilunar valves are for the pulmonary trunk and the aorta, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So the semilunar valves, you guys, I want you to remember this. Semilunar valves are always in between a ventricle and the artery that's leaving that ventricle. So that's either going to be the pulmonary artery or the aorta. So you're going to call it the pulmonary SL valve if it's on the right side of the heart, between the right ventricle and the pulmonary artery. You're going to call it the aortic semilunar valve if it's in between the left ventricle and the aorta. Everybody here clear on this? Yes? Okay. All right. Here's the right ventricle, here's the left one. You can't really see 294 here, and I actually do not like this right here, because essentially what they are referring to on this side, I want you guys to look at your heart. So open them up if you can. Okay, open them up if you can. The little hearts. Because you can't open them. These little white things, they kind of look like strings, right? Those are called tendineae. They're called your chordae tendineae. Everybody, you're good?
Oh.
Okay? The chordae tendineae is attached to your valve flaps. They're attached to the valve flaps on one end. On the other side down here, I want you to notice that they're actually connected to the muscle of your ventricles. Does everybody see that? Okay? The portion of the muscles in the ventricles that they are connected to, because they're kind of sticking up a little tiny bit, we're going to call them the papillary muscle. But they're still part of the ventricular wall. Okay? So what ends up happening here, okay, is remember your ventricles are going to contract. When they contract, because those papillary muscles are still part of the ventricular wall, those papillary muscles also contract. They will shorten. When they shorten, because they're attached to these chordae tendineae, they will pull on the flaps of your valves, your tricuspid and your bicuspid valves. They will pull on them. So that then essentially opens up the valves and allows the ventricles to push blood, okay, eject it into your pulmonary artery and your aorta. Okay, so again, form-fitting function, everybody, form-fitting function. Ventricles, remember, have to contract and push blood somewhere else, so that's why you have to have these guys here. And then when the ventricles relax, what happens to those flaps? They will close up, preventing the blood from flowing back into the ventricles from the arteries. That's tight, you. No? I think it's cool. Oops. Alright, here's a picture of the pulmonary artery and the pulmonary valve. I'm not too worried about this, okay? Next up, you have your diagrams right here, okay? Want you to notice, okay, right AV valve, left AV valve. But I will never ever call these right AV valves. What am I going to call them? What's the right AV valve called? Tricuspid. This is, so write down in your notes, this is the tricuspid valve. What's the left one called? Bicuspid. What's the other name for it? Mitral valve. So this one you need to put down bicuspid or mitral valve. What were those two letters that I want you to put in between pulmonary and valve, aortic and valve? SL. SL. What does SL stand for? Semilunar valves. Okay. So I want you guys to look at that. Do you guys? I think I explained to you why they're called bicuspid and tricuspid, right? Yes? Why?
There's two on this.
What does cusp mean?
Wings.
Wings. They mean wings. So in the tricuspid valve, you have 3 little wings or 3 little flaps. In the bicuspid, you only have 2.
It is the bicuspid valve and what else? The bicuspid and tricuspid.
All right, you guys know pacemakers. What's the primary pacemaker called? SA node is at the top of your right atrium. These pacemaker cells will contract. It'll send the message over to the first secondary pacemaker, which is your AV node, which is in the bottom, towards the bottom of your right atrium. Why is the AV node important?
Slows down the electrical impulse.
Say it louder.
Slows down the electrical impulse.
Yeah, it delays the progression of those action potentials from the SA node to the rest of the heart. Okay, that's why you end up having atrial systole first before you have ventricular systole. What does systole mean, everyone?
Contraction.
Contractions, good. So remember, this essentially makes the atria contract. It sends the message over to the AV node, okay? From there, the AV node will delay it a little bit before it sends the message out through the bundle of His, and then down the bundle branches and around, what do you call these guys here? The ones that wrap around the ventricles? Purkinje fibers, great. Okay, and then the Purkinje fibers is what makes your ventricles contract. cheat part here right quick. So I am now gonna answer your question here, okay? Devin. So Devin asked earlier, which ventricle has the thicker muscle walls and why, okay? Do you guys see how there's a pretty large difference between the right and the left? It's huge, correct? Why is that?
Because the right is passing blood to the entire body. Is that-
Not the right,
Or the left.
the left. Remember, the left side's job is to basically power the systemic circuit. It's what's gonna push blood out from the heart to the rest of your body. So distance-wise, it has to work a lot harder. The right side, notice how thin the walls are, and notice how small the chamber itself actually is. Okay, they're not actually equal. The right's actually smaller than the left one. Where does this push blood out to? The what?
The right side.
Not the right side,
Oh, yeah. It's
the lungs.
Oh.
The right side of your
Yeah,
heart is,
I thought it was like just like.
a little square.
that's the lymphatic.
Oh.
That's
Oh, wow.
lymphatic drainage.
Okay.
Okay, that's lymphatic drainage.
Brain.
So don't confuse lymphatic drainage. I think you're talking about the thoracic duct and the right lymphatic duct. So that has something to do with lymphatic drainage. We're actually talking about blood circulation here. So for blood circulation, the right side of your heart is much smaller because that's going to be involved in what's called the pulmonary circuit. Its job is to push blood out to the lungs. Where are the lungs?
Right next to it.
Right next to your heart. So distance-wise, it doesn't have to work very hard. But the left side of the heart has the job of pumping blood to the very top of your head and all the way down to the tips of your toes. So that's why it's much, much thicker, because it has to work harder. Okay? Oh, I need to point these out to you guys. So here are your valves right here. I actually like this dissection quite a bit. If you cut your heart, hopefully you'll be able to see them very well. These little white strings, these are your chordae tendineae. Do you guys see that? And then do you see how this is that ventricular wall, that muscle of the ventricles? But notice how there are bits and pieces of it that kind of stick up a little bit and connect to the chordae tendineae. These are your papillary muscles, but they're still part of the ventricles. It's just they're really important because that's what helps anchor those chordae tendineae when they do move. Everybody clear? Okay. Same thing here. Yeah,
So once again, these little things right here are the coordinate.
chordae tendineae.
Coordinate. Yeah, these little things.
Yes.
And, okay. And this is what's the populate.
Not the quarter
No. These are your actual valve flaps right here. They broke. These are your papillary muscles.
Okay.
The white strings are the chordae tendineae, but the little red things down at the bottom are the papillary muscles that connect to the ventricular wall. Okay, the rest of these you can look at. Okay, I'm not too concerned about it. Just study them for me. Okay, so here, this is a much better view of the papillary muscle. Here's that chordae tendineae. Here are the valve flaps right here. Okay, valve flaps. Notice how there's a piece of that muscle that's sticking out. It's kind of like a little ridge. Okay, that's the papillary muscle. 25. Any questions here, everybody? I'm done for the day.
These are African.
Up to